thank you, everyone. As we have more and more people joining in, I just want to take a minute and say thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Kathy Matuziak Costa, and I'm the Director of Compassionate Community Care. And it's very exciting to have everyone join us this evening and tomorrow night for our sessions on our Being With volunteer training program, courtesy of Compassionate Community Care and Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, also known as EPC. And tonight we'll have myself and Mr. Alex Schadenberg co-hosting this evening's session, and as well as tomorrow. And these two sessions are wonderful. Whenever we host these, we're really excited because we get to speak with, interact, and have participation from our wonderful guests, all of you. So definitely please, join us. Keep your video on if you want. That way we get to see your smiling faces and we get to interact. It's a little bit nice to have that. And then also to please interact if you want on the chat. If you have any questions, you can ask there. You can wait to the end. We can ask questions there as well throughout. But definitely keep that resource handy that you have received. If you got an emailed copy, you can pull that one out, or you can pull it up as a PDF as well. And that's very exciting that we have you all. So we're going to jump right in, and we'll start with Alex, who's going to give a little introduction to why we visit and kind of some of the philosophy behind the program, why CCC and EPC started this program, and why this is so important, especially today. So thank you, Alex.
Yeah, so actually what I should do is I'm going to start with a short presentation, and I'll go to my PowerPoint that I was going to do. And that is right there, share. And I'm going to go from the beginning. And this has just got some, so Kathy, there's 4 people in the waiting room that you have to let in. Anyway, so basically I'm going to go through some basic information dealing with the whole issue of euthanasia-assisted suicide quite quickly. And for your information, we're going to try and finish tonight early enough that there'll be time for questions. The other thing is that if people have experiences such as you're already been involved with visiting people for quite a few years in your community, etc., that there will be time either today or tomorrow to share those experiences, because obviously that benefits for all of us. So the culture of abandonment associated with assisted death, and I speak that way, and you'll see me more and more talking about why it's a culture of abandonment, can be changed when we care for others. And so it is essential that people who feel that their life lacks value or purpose, or they feel that no one cares for them, or they feel that there's no purpose or meaning or genuine hope, that they have significant community. I think you have to admit all, Kathy. You won't let that person in. Oh, yeah. The answer is to care and to be with others and to journey through their difficult times of life. So what I'm actually saying here is that I believe, when I look at the data, but also when all the phone calls I've received and talking to people who are considering issues like euthanasia, assisted death, made, that that most people are actually seeking this because of the fact that they feel that there's no purpose or meaning left in their life. And this has become a very big push in our culture. A recent Copenhagen study found that women who describe themselves as lonely were 3 times more likely to die within a year of a heart attack than those with an active social life. And men who describe themselves as lonely were twice as likely to die within a year. Patients who were lonely were also 3 times more likely to be anxious, depressed, and they reported a lower quality of life. Now, the importance of this study is it was a huge study done by the university, and it was they looked at everyone in Denmark who'd had a heart attack, and they followed them over a period of several years. So the data then is from a very large study, very complete. A survey of 1,896 seniors 65 and older in the UK found that more than 1 in 5, 22%, said that they have a conversation with no more than 3 people over the span of an entire week. A quarter of older adults said it makes them feel good when somebody smiles or acknowledges them while waiting in lines at places like a bank or a grocery store. 1 in 5 would be thrilled if someone stopped to ask them how their day had gone. So clearly, this is a culture of loneliness that we're living in. I know this study was from the UK, but I don't think our data is very different from this. According to the US Census Bureau, 12.5 million older adults live in a 1-person household, representing 28% of people aged 65 or older. And the National Poll on Healthy Aging that was done by the American Association of Retired Persons found that 1 in 3 seniors citizens are lonely. Research shows that chronic loneliness can impact older people's memory, their physical well-being, their mental health, their life expectancy, said the authors of the report. More than a third of the seniors in the poll said that they felt a lack of companionship, and almost 30% said they socialize with friends and family and neighbors only once a week or less. I always point out here, if for those people who are part of a church community, obviously you have the advantage because you're likely socializing with people at least once a week or less, or at least once a week in that case. When euthanasia was legalized in Canada, many people thought it would be only impact a few people. In Canada, there were 5,631 assisted deaths in 2019 and 7,595 in 2020. And the data shows that there's been way more than 10,000 already. Now, the fact is that in 2021, the fact is that we don't have 2021 data, but we can look at the Ontario data. What we're seeing is this massive increase in euthanasia. So my point is quite clear on this, that in fact, euthanasia, assisted suicide, it affects all of us. Why do people ask for euthanasia? Well, we're told that people ask for euthanasia because of pain or suffering, but the data suggests that very few people actually ask for an assisted death for these reasons. There are some people who are radical autonomists, who basically are demanding death by lethal drugs because it's their, it's their rights, they're radical autonomists, but most people are not like that at all. Most people are asking for death because they're going through a difficult time in their life, significant health condition, but they also are feeling lonely, depressed, socially isolated. They feel they've lost hope, meaning, and purpose. They feel their life lacks any value. An Irish study that was conducted over a 6-year period found that a wish to die was most often linked to loneliness and depression. So this was a significant study. It followed 8,174 people over the age of 50, and it found that 3.5% of the people had a wish to die. That's actually significant because you're talking about a fairly large study. Those who had a wish to die, 72% were identified as lonely, and 60% had significant depressive symptoms. So we need a culture that cares, not one that kills. We recognize that this loneliness is really driving this wish to die. When you legalize euthanasia, assisted death, what happens is that becomes the outcome. Euthanasia threatens my life. Human experience tells me that it's normal for me and you, if we're experiencing serious illness or personal difficulties and loneliness, that we will fear for our future. We'll question our purpose for living. We'll experience existential distress and situational depression. It's normal at times in life to lose hope. Suffering alone, as we know, is even more difficult, but suffering alone, loneliness, isolation, depression, loss of hope or purpose are leading reasons why people are asking for death, and all of us experience these feelings. Therefore, these issues affect all of us, not because of any other reason, but other than the fact that we're human. By being with others, we can make a difference in their lives, and we help protect people from MAID, euthanasia. And the Compassionate Community Care Charity was created to help people who experience difficult health conditions and to provide a training program for people to visit those who are living with loneliness and social isolation. And as you can see, those numbers are very high. There are people in our community who we know, whether it be a church community or just our neighborhoods, who we know who are experiencing significant loneliness and social isolation. We can change the world one person at a time, and we can protect people by caring. So this program is all about visiting, journeying, being with another, caring for others. We affirm a person's purpose for living by being with them. We reduce their loneliness and their isolation, and we help them find a way through their depression and isolation, and we allay their fear of suffering by being with. As I always say to people, God created us to be with others. If you don't believe in God, then you can just simply say, we have evolved to be with others. Interconnectedness is essential to the human person. Part of the problem with our modern culture is we've become highly isolationist. We've become highly about the individual. Well, humans aren't really individuals. Even though we're individual in our nature, we are made to be with others. We are all affected by the legalization of euthanasia because we are human. We all experience the same human emotions and feelings. And this cultural loneliness affects our health, it affects our quality of life, and it can be a threat to our life. So we are focusing on visiting the lonely and caring for our own, members of our parishes, our communities, people who we know. It is our goal to replace the culture of death with a culture of care. And this is the basic information that you already have on compassionate community care. And that's my basic introduction. And I'm going to stop the share. And as Kathy continues to allow people in, I'm going to go to this very short video that I picked out. Now, this is an important video. Now, I'm going to say to you right off the bat that a lot of the videos you're going to find online about elder loneliness come from the UK. And the reason they come from the UK is because the UK has recognized they've got a massive problem with loneliness for elderly people, and they've got a significant problem with elder suicide. And so quite a few years ago, they started a ministry of the government just looking at this issue alone. So they've got, like how we have in Canada, a minister for finance and a minister for health and a minister for all these things. They have a minister for elder care in the UK, whether that's the exact term or not, but they have somebody in the government just focusing on that. And they've got a whole ministry on that. So there's a lot of good videos out of the UK. This one is, as you see, 2 minutes and 21 seconds.
Margaret tends to her garden when she can. The Parkinson's she suffers from means she can no longer get out as much as she used to. So the retired nurse has joined a befriending service aimed at older people to try to reduce the amount of time she spends on her own.
There are days when, especially in the winter, when you can't get out or I can't get out, and it's just nice that somebody comes to you and it stops all the bad things happening.
Bad things and
depression, I'm meaning in that context, yeah.
As well as volunteers, Margaret sees and speaks to her family regularly. Some older people, though, in Britain have little contact with anyone else.
Well, we hear terrible stories where there are some people that don't have family, there are some people that have family that are estranged from their family, so they're so lonely, they get very depressed. Some talk about ending their own lives, and it's heartbreaking.
People in the UK are living longer than ever before. At a community centre in London run by volunteers, pensioners meet regularly for a catch-up over a cup of tea. Many people, as they get older, are living well, but some are struggling, and that's having a big impact on the nation's health. Recent studies on loneliness found that more than 1 million older people, or about 10% of people in the UK over the age of 65, say they feel lonely all or most of the time. Researchers also found loneliness can increase the risk of heart disease and stroke by about a third.
Loneliness has been equated to cause mortality similar to 15 cigarettes a day. What it does is it causes an increased chance of stroke, heart disease. It also causes many mental health issues, so it's often linked to depression.
Admitting to feeling lonely is still seen as something of a taboo. For Margaret, getting the right help is part of trying to ensure that getting older is something shared and not always faced alone. Emma Hayward, Al Jazeera in Surrey.
So that's this short video. Now they obviously are doing something different than what we're talking about doing, because they're offering lunch and that sort of thing, and that's very good. Nonetheless, the data, I think, if we did research in Canada, would be very similar to the data in Canada from the UK. I don't think our data would be so different as theirs. Nonetheless, Kathy, it is your turn to take over.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the slides. So starting off, thank you for that, Alex. And for that great...
I'll open the slides, right?
Perfect. Thank you. And starting off, our first point of interest here is on chapter 1, which is our human needs. And when we talk about human needs, there's mainly the 4 areas. There's the physical, the mental, the spiritual, and the social. And as we know too, there's a big factor on all of these is that the physical impacts all of these. The mental, everything is connected. And so one of the things we want to make sure we consider especially is that there's many reasons why we visit. this slide is really important. We're seeing more and more now, there's a lack of companionship people are experiencing. We want to reduce loneliness and isolation. We want to especially watch for signs of self-neglect or abuse, and also ensure that we're providing a sense of belonging. So for people, when you meet with them and you participate in this program, especially because this is catered to meeting with people, once you start implementing the My Story interview workbook and some of the questions from here, you'll see how quickly people really respond and feel that they're getting value from this, because they feel like they're being heard. And there really is a strong sense from people that they are being really listened to, and they're all of what they're sharing with you is really valuable. So we're jumping in here. So this is our human needs slide. And ultimately, we want to take people from a feeling of neglect potentially, or isolation, or even loneliness and depression, to a happy place that they feel valued and actually heard. And the experience, benefits both parties involved. And like I mentioned just a minute ago, there are these 4 needs that are recognized: physical, mental, social, spiritual. And when we share and help them participate in all of these needs, they feel valued, but they also feel filled up, and they feel like all of these needs are met. If you're missing on one of these needs, or any of these areas are neglected, it will impact everything. So I recently did this study where I checked out all my own physical needs, and even the physical, especially like if you're losing, part of your health in a sense, and maybe people are getting a little bit overweight, or if they're feeling a little lethargic, that's going to impact everything else. So there's kind of gaps in people's lives, and we want to make sure we help them fulfill on those needs and those gaps too when we meet with them. So some of the physical needs that we want to address here, and especially tonight, is when you're speaking to someone, is the notion of exercise. It's important that people get out, especially now that the weather is getting nicer and people are starting to come outdoors again, and spring is finally up on us. We can actually participate in outdoor activities, which is great. So this opportunity opens up now for everyone to be able to meet more, so even especially because it's outdoors. So definitely taking advantage of that is important. Part of the physical needs with this is here, exercise, nutrition, hydration, and all sleep all play a role together. And medication is the one that kind of draws everything together, especially when we're speaking to people over the age of 65. 90% of people take at least one medication per week, and more than 40% take at least 5 different drugs per week. So this is really integral that we talk about this point, how often medication plays a role. Like speaking in my own family, I look at, for example, my mom, who relies heavily on her medication. She has a number of different, ailments, health issues. She's got high blood pressure, diabetes, cholesterol, and everything, comes as a cocktail in the morning. She takes a whole little, a little shot glass full of 12 pills every day. So that's a meal already. So we just have to keep things like that in mind. People react differently to different medications, and we want to ensure that we meet those needs, especially since we want to make sure people are hydrated, and not being hydrated is really key here. So making sure people have their hydration when they're with you, or even before you, and preparing and reminding them that. And that will play on the next need, which is mental needs. Part of our reasoning when we meet with people, we want to keep people stimulated by speaking with them, interacting with them. Oftentimes with that's good. With mental needs, we have, depression can become a real factor. It's a serious issue. I know my own parents, when I don't speak to them for a day or a couple days, my mom says, "You haven't called me in a week." Right? So this is a huge, it can become even a bigger issue. And I make sure that I try to call them every single day. A great video we showed and shared on our CCC's social media is that sometimes when, you feel like you might have a whole year with someone, or you feel like you have a number of years in the future, we think of years. But really, in a year, how many times do we make a point to get together with certain key people in our lives? If you're part of a community, a church group, or a type of service, or type of charity or community group that you want to assemble with people that may be vulnerable, how often will you actually realistically get together with that person, and how long do you think you may have? Today, I just got an email on our CCC side that says that 2 people in one region of a group of people actually died in a council of CWO members. So this is a group of people who meet regularly, and because people are just moving right on, and I just personally found a friend today that passed away, my own accountant. We were shocked So we just got news this morning. A huge, group of us knows the same person, and it's just shock when it happens. So, mental needs are huge, and we want to make sure that depression, especially for seniors, is as a huge issue. So, and another level of where depression can be affected, especially when it comes to mental needs, is a type of dementia, Alzheimer's, that affects 1 in 20 people over the age of 65, and that's a huge number. 1 in 6 over 80. So it is important to keep that in relation to what we're talking to today. Socially, when we're talking about social needs, especially, we want to ensure that a lack of a social relationship for someone is a strong risk factor for early death, and this is key. You can see people start to become socially isolated, and then soon, slowly, you find the physical isolation gets deeper and wider, and then all of a sudden you don't hear from anyone at all, and then it just gets they feel like a burden, or they're getting tired. Sometimes you may hear often when you speak to people that they say, I feel exhausted. There's that idea or notion of I'm exhausted, I'm tired. Sometimes it's not just physical exhaustion, it's mental understanding, of feeling of, oh, I can't even get over this big hurdle of getting dressed up and going out or meeting with so and so. So you being that liaison of a person to communicate with them and then just to interact with them is really key. And it's really important for people to understand that they can rely on you as a person in their life to be able to participate on a regular basis with them, keep in communication with them, and simply be a reliable source of interaction. And then you develop this sense of actual trust, and then they can rely on that trust. So it grows, and the friendship and the relationship grows, which is really important for this type of appointment, and especially this type of relationship. Yes.
I was going to interject for 1 second because we sort of just jumped into this.
Sure.
And the fact of it is when you go through the booklet, you're going to notice that what we're doing is we're going through a lot of the issues and skills that are important when you're visiting with somebody. So a lot of the topics that you're going to see here are issues that may come up or things that are important to remember as you're visiting someone. That doesn't mean that, obviously if you're visiting someone you already know, these are different issues. But I mean, if you're visiting someone, let's say it's in a church community and you don't really know them, but you've been given this contact and you contact them, etc., you might find there's some issues and so this is, I would just say, a training to give you knowledge in a wider sense of concerns on these issues. So that's what I'm just saying. It's an overview of all these things, and the booklet has more information. So I'll go on. I just interjected because I knew we jumped into it. People probably thinking that you got hit by I would just say the fire hose. But anyway, we'll go on.
And then when we're speaking about this, especially with spiritual needs, oftentimes we see people, if you have a person who happens to be religious, especially, or you're religious, we really want to focus on their needs. So definitely being alert and in tune with what their needs are when it comes to religiosity, spirituality is really key. Oftentimes we hear, we can get into a meeting with someone and we want to start with, for example, a prayer, or gathering with opening it up with a prayer. That's a great way to open up that spiritual need for someone and to act on it. So where we're talking at the beginning about physical needs, we're tying in spiritual needs now, because you're actually showing ways that you can involve that person and actually relate to them in that spiritual sense. Spiritual needs involve your relationship with God. And for some people who may not believe in God, like Alex said at the beginning, they might feel that this is all interconnected, that we're part of a greater plan or a greater purpose, and that there is an existential relationship that they have with themselves in the universe, perhaps, or with some higher power. So there may be, the way they understand their needs may be different than yours, but you want to cultivate that relationship, whatever it is for them, in the sense that makes sense to them. Religiously, we have religious needs, for example. There's also, praying with someone. Perhaps you may want to consider participating in a religious ceremony with them. If it's during the week, and if it's an event like a Sunday or a Saturday, and they might partake in certain spiritual, religious observances, you may want to ask them if they want to attend that service together. And that's something you can actually incorporate into your visits if that's something you're interested in as well.
Yep.
And going to church, for example. Yeah, go ahead.
And as I said, we have to be very careful about this issue because, a lot of people have their own spiritual nature to them, as Kathy had said, but there's also some people who in their past have experienced some abuse and things like that. But nonetheless, when someone is sharing, it's important that we encourage that, because it's a very important growth for them and for you. Our faith interconnects us in a very important way. But as I said, we have to be very careful, especially in these days. Some people get very touchy about this, and it's important that we recognize that from the beginning. I always suggest that we, in this sort of thing of our spiritual needs, that we introduce it by sort of in a question way, because somebody may make it very clear they're not interested. Well, we're visiting someone because we're concerned about them, but we know that you can't impose anything on anybody, and nor should you. So that's just the reality.
Absolutely. And then once we notice this, you can actually bring in those things into their life, into that relationship, in that friendship. Reading spiritual or religious books to that person might be helpful too. People have certain speakers that they want to hear from. As a person who's religious, I may want to participate, for example, in a novena if we're going to be speaking on a regular basis or something like that. You never know. So that's really interesting for someone who is of like-mindedness. And then turning to a higher presence, God, angels, participating in that type of more close assembly of that faith, or that recognition of that importance, is important perhaps for some people as well. And that will play into existential needs as well. So for example, there's really great books that you can actually address certain issues. People can reflect on their previous life experiences, and this may actually bring up previous occurrences in their lives. They may want to deter away from certain things, and definitely, realizing that area may be sensitive, you may want to reflect and actually steer clear of certain things because of that reason. So you definitely want to talk to people about their meaning of life, and what does suffering mean sometimes, because that can play together, right? Meaning of life and suffering, depending on their life and their experiences in their life. You definitely want to see an overall picture. It's like an overview. And this need for inner peace is really key, important here, because some people will find that they are, they need to forgive, for example, certain things that have happened in their lives. They may, for example, have, a great life, a sense of satisfaction. And that's great. That comes from different areas. They might feel like they've had a whole full kind of experience of life. And I've realized this recently too, talking to a few older people in my life, particularly, there's a sense from people when you speak to them that they felt complete in their life, that they're ready to move on, even if they're, fully able, participating in their lives. They don't really want to meet with someone. But there's also a sense from a lot of people that they got jaded over life, right? And I wish for those people, especially, that they have a chance to meet with someone who has a fuller, complete sense of life, because that person, especially if it's not someone direct to them, like a sibling, or perhaps, for example, like a child-parent relationship, a third party can actually, like you, can come into that person's life and impact them in a very positive way, because they might start to hear and have light shed on them that otherwise would not have happened before, because they're more open to someone like you, a third person, a person that's not in their direct circle. And that way you can actually participate and give them some more inner peace and the need, for example, to heal, for example, for certain things. And then the last thing is here is need for giving. So when someone feels like they're participating fully in their spiritual life, they may want to give back to the church or the community, and they may want to participate in other ways in their religious life. So, feel free to participate with them and ask them what are their needs, spiritually speaking. Okay, that's great.
So I was just going to make a quick comment. I received a phone call because I've been taking the calls from the emergency line that we have and a woman contacted me, it was about 3 weeks ago, and she has significant health problems, and she's very, very lonely. And a lot of this is actually her second time calling the line, because she went through a lot of loneliness during COVID, particularly, and she has health problems with her legs, so she's not really able to walk properly anymore. And one of the things I had said to her is, are you part of a faith community? And she said, well, yes. She said she was Catholic. And I said, oh, but she hasn't been to church in a very long time. So what had happened is that she was explaining how she did not feel welcomed anymore in the community that she was participating in. And somebody had said something to her, and I can't remember the full gamut of it, but the point of it is I said to her, well, there are other, because she said she was Catholic. There are other Catholic churches not far from where you live. And so I encouraged her to try and get involved with a faith community. And why would I do that? Well, because she was very lonely, very on her own, very, very down. And she was very clearly admitting that she was a believer. So I thought that that would be of great help to her. And I'm hoping she did fulfill that, but we'll see. You know, we can, you know, lead somebody. We can't make them do something.
Great. Thank you, Alex. And so this brings us to our next chapter, which we're going to speak about tonight, is visiting advice. So this one is more pragmatic and practical because of COVID. Lots of things have changed in the last 24 plus months. And as our update here, I love, you know, having this because people often ask us about this. What's the update when it comes to COVID? And it's always evolving and changing. So especially nowadays, some people may feel more comfortable with having PPE, hand sanitizer, face masks on them readily available. They want to perhaps make other arrangements too, maybe have a visor, something else. Some people use gloves sometimes, I notice in hospitals, but really it's up to what makes you comfortable and makes the person you're visiting with more comfortable. Obviously, just having that inner insight, just knowing before you're visiting, finding out, especially when you're calling, let's say like you're planning to go to a hospital and you want to visit in a long-term care facility, for example, nursing home, you want to find out what the protocols are in your area, in that particular institution. So you want to call ahead and get any guidelines that they have in place. And I stress this just because even on a 24 basis, at 24 hours, I notice things change. My husband had an appointment just this morning, and we had a notice that came through last night that changed some of the visiting protocols. So attending support people that are participating in visits with people. So all these things keep changing and evolving. So please do find out what the place of visitation has as the protocol, especially when you're part of a group like a CWL or Knights or other, you know, religious communities or Christian groups. You want to, some groups will require you to do a criminal background check. In Canada especially, that's the case. And so you'll need to do a vulnerable sector check, and that will require going to a police location headquarters and give your information, and they'll check that in their system, and then you can actually go on visits. So this is all preparing for visiting with people when you're doing it on a very on a group scale, that you want to ensure that you have all of those protocols in place already. And then once you have that and you're actually going to meet with someone, you want to ensure that you have, or representing an organization, you have your ID way before you go, and you have all these in mind, and especially do an assessment before you go. So if you're not feeling well and you're not, you haven't had, let's say like you're not feeling great, definitely don't go. So that's the main thing. And you want to make sure that when you're going and before you actually go, you are dressed appropriately. If you're going outside, you're dressing appropriately, arranging the visit ahead of time. You call the person you're speaking with and you make sure that you have everything confirmed, that you're meeting Tuesday at 4 o'clock or Friday at 5, and you're going to pick them up or you're going to meet them where they are, and then you'll go from there. And what are your plans? What are you planning to do when you meet with that person? So you just want to make a note and mental reminder for yourself and make those preparations in advance, that you have everything.
I was going to make one comment about the vulnerable sector check issue. A lot of people involved with visiting are doing so because they're connected to a community group, such as I say, a church community or whatever it might be. And usually that church community, therefore, will give you a letter, and that would help you get your vulnerable sector check and everything. If there are any issues ever with a vulnerable sector check and there's a cost or anything like that, Compassionate Community Care would be happy to pay for that. We're not worried about those type of minor costs. But the fact of it is usually you'd be part of a community group, and then you'd be communicating with them, as an example.
Yes, that's great. Thank you for that, Alex. And that's a great mention because, there are lots of people who join us on these training sessions, and they want to go off, branch off, and make their own compassionate community care groups, their own chapters, which is really great when you think about, how people want to set this up so that when someone calls in and says, hey, I want a visitor to come to see my mom, which we actually got just a couple of weeks ago, someone out in Barrie, is actually looking for a visitor, someone who can speak with their mother on a regular basis. So knock, knock, when someone knocks on the door, would you answer? If anyone in this group happens to be in Barrie or knows someone in Barrie, please definitely reach out to us, because that's how these connections are made. So we'd love to have you connect to that person. So definitely planning your visit before you go is key. Making sure you know their schedule. Don't visit when you're not feeling well, or if they're not feeling well, reschedule if that's the case, and make sure they're well aware of that. And definitely before, if you can't go for whatever reason, let them know. So when visiting someone who can't speak, you want to go in pairs, and you want to ensure that you actually have a conversation with both people. Yeah.
The other thing is, of course, especially when you're visiting people you don't know, it is important to go as pairs anyway. That's a very important thing to do, simply be for your own protection and for the protection of the other person. Often it's someone that you might know. Let's say, again, it's a church community. It could be someone who you've known for 20 years, but now that person is now much older, and now they might be a shut-in in their home, or they're living in a nursing home, etc. And you've already met this person. They know who you are. You know who they are. So that's a little bit different. But certainly, if you don't know the person, it's better to go in pairs, always.
Yeah, thank you. And when you arrive and you see the person, you want to ensure you wash your hands. This is really key. Some people are getting sick more often these days, and these cold bugs are flying around. So want to make sure we keep everyone at ease, and just having that vision and understanding. When someone comes into my home, I've had a baby 5 weeks ago, and for me, it's just a nice kind of idea of courtesy when someone comes into our house, especially now the newborn. They come in and they ask, "Oh, where's the washroom?" And they go in there, wash their hands. That's a great thing, actually. And I don't have to worry to ask them. So if they don't need to ask you, they'll probably feel safe and comfortable too, just to practice that. Hand hygiene is really important. Having warm hands is really great. When you start the visit, you want to come in, not wearing rings on your hands is nice too, because you might scratch them and you might hurt or pull on something. So definitely when you're starting the visit, you walk in, you're respectful. You want to knock again, and or ring the doorbell before you enter. If it's a group, kind of a home setting where you're walking into an area where there's more than one person, then you want to knock on the entrance of the doorway. And if there's more than one person in that room, for example, like if it's a hospital room or a nursing care room, you want to ensure that you knock so that both persons know who's entering, and you're very clear on that. Whenever speaking, there's a tradition of Mr. Mrs. Obviously, everyone I'm sure here knows that. In other languages, if you happen to be speaking another language, this is really key, and maybe not so much in English, but I think it is still key, and it is a polite common courtesy practice. But in other languages, especially in my Polish, I'm Polish, so we say Mr. Mrs. That means pan pani, so it's like Mr. Pan pani. So you address that person with that sense of respect, and that way they feel especially that they're being honored in that way, in that regard. And especially knocking when you're coming in, that's really a sign of respect, and you're coming into their home, so you want to make sure that you're observing all of that, really just keeping attention of that. And then you always want to make sure that you approach the person from the front. If you are walking into a room setting, if they're lying down, you're coming into their full focus and their view, and that way you can introduce yourself. And obviously being communicating that is really important. So communication, for example, language, being respectful, addressing yourself who you are, introducing yourself first to everyone, and then guiding the discussion to be a good listener, giving them time to respond. When they're speaking to you, don't cut them off. This is really key, because we often want to say a lot of things, and we don't ever sometimes have that opportunity to hear everyone out. So I always say, my husband reminds me this, and I have to remind myself when I'm speaking to other people, we have 2 ears, 1 mouth. So we want to listen more than we speak. And being a good listener is giving them time and being alert to what they're saying. Sometimes people will actually kind of cut themselves off just to hear what you're doing, and to reciprocate that. And just being aware of what they're saying, especially the tone of voice, how they're acting, is really key here. So thank you for that. In terms of nonverbal communication, we want to make sure that we're very sensitive to how they express themselves, both as a facial expression goes, but also, when the people are speaking, oftentimes we want to make sure that if someone says something and it makes them uncomfortable, that we are aware of it. It's very important, and it's part of that listening, especially important how you feel about what they're saying. So when they're talking and you look like this and you look like you're really tired or you're distracted and you're looking at your phone or something like that, that's obviously going to communicate a certain level to them. And I always make sure that I try to face people head on and not be too bold, but making sure that they understand that we're there for them. And touch is great if they're comfortable with it. You can hold their hand, but only if you're comfortable. So that's again another level of boundaries that we want to respect in terms of what they're comfortable with. And their voice, and your voice is really important here, not being too loud. Sometimes we are very energetic. We want to express ourselves. We're excited. We want to ensure that they understand that we are happy to be with them, but not too too excited that they might feel jarred or a little bit upset by it. Making sure that we have eye contact is important. So speaking to them directly and communicating to them is key. Body movements. If I'm sitting like this and I'm away from the person, they're going to hear me a different way than if I'm, speaking to them head on. And moving, especially, for example, the way they sit, you want to ensure that they can have, they're more comfortable during that exchange. So making sure that if they want to move off their bed and you don't want to be sitting on their bed either, you guys can actually take yourselves, move yourselves to an area like a living room or a community area that makes sense for that visit. If, for example, something about their appearance reveals how they feel about themselves, which often does, we find it does, they may have certain clothing that they don't want to wear, but they have recently become overweight, or they can't dress a certain way that they used to. Just being respectful of that is really important. Culture is a huge factor here, so we definitely want to respect how that shows up in their dress, and not giving it too much regard when it comes to changes, right, on a person. And in terms of space, respecting their personal space is really key. Being aware that socially, some people may not want to be in close proximity. There's a 6-foot thing that's happening everywhere that a lot of people are comfortable with nowadays, that they want to physically distance themselves, especially when you're in a healthcare setting. So that's kind of something to keep in mind too, coming into, being and visiting now, which is what we're doing and changing. So
the one thing about appearance that it does tell you is if somebody is not being properly cared for. So if you went to visit someone and their hair was unkept and their clothes were really dirty, and I'm not talking about the old guy who's never, and his wife passed away and now he just doesn't properly take care of him. So I'm talking about actually there's signs of neglect. I'm not saying that there is actual neglect, but often how someone has themselves appearing does show a sign there could be neglect going on, and it is important to see those signs and to recognize that.
yes, thank you for that. Yes, exactly. And in terms of emotions, this is a great slide too. Recognizing that a person may be anxious in a situation, discouraged, or feeling frustrated. When I went in recently with my husband to an appointment, the way things were moving, I felt like, okay, we need to take some time. And, there's sometimes when people feel, that they're heard, it's a different expression. It's a different level of expression in their body. So you definitely want to ensure that you are reflecting on how they are looking in terms of their emotions, but also being sensitive to their body and everything else. We want to sometimes say things to them, for example, reflecting back on what they say. So, Mr. and Mrs. Brian, do you feel that this is how this situation played out? Do you feel comfortable with how this happened? And those are questions that help them reflect and actually hear on your end and their end that they're actually being heard. And that's really key here, I think. Establishing that level of trust when you're speaking and you're communicating is really important. And it allows them to see that you're aware and you becoming more aware of what they're saying. But also it helps to validate their feelings. So we're not visiting people to argue with them. We want to make sure that people are happy when they're meeting with you, and they feel that they've just been blessed, or if they feel on a sense of purpose, that they're achieving something, that they actually committed to something that's good and it's going to have a positive impact on their life. Well, that's wonderful. Sometimes people do like to argue. I used to be one of those people. Now in these days, I just want to have peace, and I have 4 kids and I don't have time to argue. So So I just want to, share with them a good time and have people feel that they're validated, right? So definitely participating in that way is much more important than anything else. Wonderful. And in terms of conversation, we want to help how and understand people in terms of, it's windy outside, it makes you feel, this way, we can use those statements, and actually that helps in terms of conversation too. How does it make you feel when someone, suggests this to you or does this to you? Those are statements that help bring on assessment and also understanding from people, and that may grow your relationship and your relationship of conversation too. And being conscious as well, there are people that have many memory issues. This is a real key thing that I'm noticing that's coming up with my conversation with my own family. My father is, elderly and getting in his years. He's now 75, and sometimes when I speak to him today, he doesn't recall what happened yesterday. So my husband, when they're talking, it's often, I'm the middleman between two people, and my dad likes to ask me if what happened on this day, and how much did your husband pay for this? And it's the same question we've been receiving every day, every time we talk to him. So it's really funny to me, maybe, but it's not funny to him, because for him it's really important. And for people who want to ask questions, it's good, it's really great, but also being sensitive to, you may have to ask the same or answer the same question every time you go and visit with that person. That may just become a phenomena. Respecting that, don't getting upset or frustrated is really important, and being conscious of that memory issue is key. And sometimes if someone has dementia, for example, you may want to have them answer yes or no questions. And if you want them to make a choice, for example, you ask one question at a time. So for example, would you like to have tea? Yes or no? And then you move on to, would you like a cookie? Perfect. Wonderful. Here you go. Really waiting for that response, and encouraging them to talk about their past will actually encourage them to talk in general for everything. And that will help them to draw out their memories, which will be more clear to them than usually what is happening presently. And the past often is stronger. It's made stronger ties in our consciousness in terms of versus the current and the present. So it's nice for people to share about their past, especially, and they love sharing memories. Most people will like to have, certain things that they want to share with you. And some people don't even realize they want to talk about certain things about their past. And that's what's really great. Everyone has a story and they want to share it. And then one thing too, to keep in mind here, is you might actually have a plan in your mind that you're going to visit someone and you want to reach 1, 2, 3 things on, let's say, your book of your interview workbook. And you want to establish, for example, adulthood, or you want to go through and talk about their childhood in one session. That's ambitious, wonderful. That may not happen. So just being aware of that and respectful of time and the person who you're visiting with, what they want to talk on, great. Let them speak and let them share so that they can continue kind of your meeting with them and continue their trust and relationship with you deeper. One thing when we're
Can I say one thing here? Just one
Yes.
second. I know I'm interrupting, but remember, the whole purpose of visiting is to be there for that person. So it's not about us. And this is the interesting thing. So we're going through a lot of issues here with you and talking about these things only because these are sort of basic, information for that. But I mean, when we're meeting with someone, it's about meeting with them and being with them. So this is sort of has to be the mindset with all of this. And I think that's what we're going through with the whole conversation tips.
Yes, exactly. And then one more thing I would mention here for the conversation tips starting off is if, language matters, especially, and this was one of the things from before, you might come across in the book too, is that when we speak to a person, it's always person first centered. And so if a person has a disability, for example, you want to ensure that you're speaking to the person that in a sense of there's a person with a disability, not a disabled person, or, a child with autism, not an autistic child. So always treating people the way you want to be treated. And this is really important. So we don't want to ever say that in that regard. We also don't want to infantilize people. So if you notice a person is acting a certain way, or you don't think they understand you, you speak to them as an adult always, and being very patient, not arguing, and also making sure that we don't try to diminish anything about them, especially when we're talking or having a conversation. No arguments obviously is important, and we don't want to create any type of false hope. So again, this is like Alex saying, this is an overall view of looking at visits and being with people, but sometimes people may find that they want to encourage people and give them hope, but we don't want to also, for example, bring up medical situations that may not get better, and we, change that type of understanding for a person. So we want to make sure that we stay at the same point of where they actually are. And so when we're speaking to them, obviously being honest and being completely genuine and not artificial is one very important factor. One can always tell how you speak to a person if you're actually being genuine, and it takes time to form the trust and the friendship with people. So we definitely want you to participate in that fully. And one of those things is not to be judgmental. And especially if you're having a meeting with two people, them, and let's say their caregiver or someone else in their life, like an interpreter is there perhaps, you don't want to ever whisper to them or their family members and have a different relationship between someone else that's involved in that versus them. Okay. Perfect. And in front, especially when you're speaking to them, you don't want to reflect to them as if they're not there. You're always participating fully with them and engaging them in the dialogue that's happening. Okay, great. And obviously, we have our problems, everyone does, but we don't want to bring that up when we're meeting with people. So keeping that in mind, you always want to have a positive, resounding kind of demeanor about you, that you are going to be there for them. And if they discuss their own troubles, great, but we don't really want to engage that type of dialogue with them necessarily in that interaction, in that meeting. One of the things you may want is, steer away from speaking about their illness, and you don't want to have them feel like they need to talk. So sometimes they just want to be quiet. They may want to listen to music. So great. If you have a phone or a device that you can use, please play some music for them, or a talk or a poem, or read something to them.
Yep.
Yeah, these are all great ways and strategies. You can even do an activity, for example, like, playing chess, cards, watching a movie together, go for a walk, being just quiet with someone and feeling their comfort level with you increase as you're more quiet is actually a really great thing. Because if you can be quiet with someone, that can actually mean a lot more to them than just talking. So, and especially speaking in a nice normal sense and tone of voice is important here, and not speaking too loudly, like we said. That's key as well. If they have or make a mistake, and if for example, they bring up an error when it comes to history or cultural things, or something that is really a mistake, I wouldn't bring it up. I would just kind of, look over it and kind of go to the next topic, or continue talking about something that makes sense. And especially, buying gifts. I think this is a key one here. A lot of people want to buy you gifts. I just got off the phone with my father. He hasn't seen my kids in a while because he was sick, but the first thing he said, he was out shopping and he wants to buy them gifts, and he wants, he's at Value Village, and he sees this nice doll he wants to pick up for my kids. And I said, no, Dad, it's okay. Don't bring anything. He's so generous. So, not accepting gifts is a great thing, because then they see you as being there for them, not for the exchange that might happen. Okay. So that's really key here.
Yeah, but your dad might be a little bit different though, Kathy.
Yeah.
He might differ. I think one thing that's important, this whole thing with speaking in
Yes.
an unnatural tone of voice,
Yes.
because if someone has, let's say, as they're getting older, they might have some cognitive issues, and it becomes apparent, right, that they have these cognitive issues. But if we speak to them like as you said earlier, we don't infantilize people. If we speak to them in a different tone,
Mhm.
that demeans them. And so, you might have to speak slower just because of the reality. Maybe they don't hear well, etc., whatever it might be. But we try and speak to somebody as if they're an adult. Well, obviously they are an adult. You speak to them as if you would speak to anybody. You might have to adjust it a little bit, but we don't speak in different tones of voice. And you do hear people doing that, and I don't think that lowers their sense of self-esteem, because it makes them feel like, they're just like patting on their head or something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, that's right. And then this brings us to the final part of visiting, which is ending the visit. Some days there's a great visit that we just had, and other times not so great. So when that happens, you just kind of move on, and you want to, adjust the visit accordingly. Sometimes you want to end it early, and that's fine too. People will appreciate that if they're having a bad day, especially, right? Some days things are not going right, and it's better to just pray for that person and move on and say, let's meet again. When can we do this? And meet another time. But either way, it's important to kind of have a way that you finish off well and on a positive note. I always say this, that if something starts badly, it usually ends well, right? So the vice versa. So when we can pray with that person, that might be something that they may request, feeling that you can acknowledge that and deliver, that would be great, because a lot of people appreciate that. And meeting someone for the first time, especially, that really breaks the ice too, if they feel they're comfortable with that. That's great. And then ending that visit again with prayer, which is really beautiful too. Definitely short welcome visits, what they call doctor visits in the Portuguese culture, is, kind of an in and out. You come in, you speak what you need to talk about, and you leave. That's a doctor visit. So those short visits are great too. And they're better sometimes than the long laborious ones, right? That you think you need to plan over, over time and days. So when you're actually going to meet with a person for the next time, you want to ensure you plan that out, and you're ensuring that that person recognizes what days they're available first, and then you're setting yourself up accordingly, and you have them noted down, or they put on a calendar. You can relay that information to their caregiver if they allow you to, and that way everyone knows the date and time that you're going to be visiting, and they know as well. So it's not like a hidden surprise. And definitely appreciating any type of gratitude that you can share with that person that you have for them sharing their time with you is really important here. Being genuine is really key, because that will set you up in the tone for the next visit, that you're coming into their space and their time in their life, and they're going to really appreciate that the next time around, especially. So thank you.
So once again, prayer request is something we have to be very careful with. Obviously, if someone wants to pray with you, that's a great blessing and that's important. But some people might not be interested in that at all. If you're doing these visits based on your connection to a church community, you would assume that they might want to pray with you. Nonetheless, we'd always be very careful with that, because obviously it's a good thing if they want it. If not, it could create a terrible end to the visit if they're really upset about it. I'm not saying they should be upset about it. I'm just saying some people might get upset.
That's right. Absolutely. Thank you. And then after the visit, you want to prompt them for the next visit, like you said. And one thing we do is after you've left, you want to keep a journal with you. You can go into your car or vehicle, whichever, and a safer kind of removed area. And you can actually just put quickly notes down from that visit. And this is just for yourself, your own eyes. This isn't something you're going to share with someone in your group or community, or even them perhaps necessarily. This, especially for them, if it's something that's more private, but you are really just kind of keeping a journal, an entry for each meeting that you have and visit for your own self, that you can reflect on later. That, let's say you meet every Tuesday, on Monday night before your visit on Tuesday, you want to actually go over your journal and look at, what did your notes say from last time? Was there an area that you spoke to, George, and George said, I really don't like talking about, soccer XYZ team. Okay, great, because that will bother George, sorry. And so you want to make sure that you don't do that. Or if something happened in their past, you don't want to address that. Keeping that in your mind for that meeting is really important. And that journal actually helps you in that regard. And you can actually evaluate yourself too in your journal, on a scale of 5, 1 to 10, how do you feel that visit went? 5. Great. How can I make the visit better for next time? Maybe incorporate this, this, and this. Perfect. Monday, you're going to prepare this and this for Tuesday, so you have that for your visit. So that makes it really practical. And your journal is actually a tool that you can use in your arsenal for your visits with people that will actually help you. And you can actually write down names and people that they reflected on. And this is why it's great to do this after the visit, is that you can actually have, the names that they shared with you. Let's say they have 3 kids and their names are, Josie, Linda, and Betty. And well, great. Next on Tuesday, you can actually say, hey, have you spoke to Josie or Linda or Betty this week? Or, have you met with them? How did it go? Depending on the person, that can actually help bring an enrichment to their meeting with you, and other opportunities. So thinking of ways you can actually strategically bring in different things into your meetings with them that will help them and move them forward in your meetings, and also just helping them overall. Games, perhaps, like we said, bringing art together, things like that, they can do with you, things that you can do with them, things they can actually participate in would be great. So that's ways to note in your book, in your journal for that. And if you have any questions, by all means, you can talk to your supervisor. Oftentimes too, there's some people might have or experience, they will actually disclose to you that there's things that are happening, in their lives, like that are abuse related. So there could be, there's certain situations where there's actually elder abuse happening and they don't even know it. And you actually might be realizing it for them. And so if that's a concern of yours and you think that might happen, then definitely let us know. If you feel, if you've spoken to a supervisor and they relay that to you, then yes, by all means, contact us at CCC EPC and let us know this, because if you want some support in how to address these concerns, especially when it deals with elder abuse, you want to do that soon, very quickly, immediately, actually. And, anything that you can help yourself in terms of that, that's better for you and for that person, and making sure that you are safeguarding yourself and that person. So talk to your supervisor, call us. We have a helpline. It is 24/7. You can call at any time. So if you think something is immediately happening and it's an emergency, by all means, give us a call on the helpline number, which is listed here. You can take a screenshot or, write it down, or even call us during our office hours. That links into our phones and that's available anytime too. So you can actually reach out to us if you have any questions. Okay. So thank you so much.
2 points. It says speak to your supervisor. Well, obviously speaking, if you're with church community, etc., there might be the pastoral minister or whoever who is someone who's sort of coordinating the visiting. That would be, I assume in that case, your supervisor. The other point of keeping your journal, journals, this is a completely private source. This is private information. This is to be shared actually with no one. Because this is their information. You're only keeping a journal for the purpose of enhancing your visiting experience. And as exactly as Kathy had said, if the person has 3 children, as an example, that you know the names of those children, because that might be something they would want to talk about.
Great, thank you.
So we're going to talk about the My Story now, and this has actually become a very probably the central point of what we're doing is and as you see, it dies out in the video. But this was also sent to you as an email link, as a link on your email. And this is the workbook. We have these also able to be sent to you. So if you order them, we can mail them to you. And we don't charge anything for it. The original intention was to charge for everything because, of course, all this stuff costs money to produce, etc. But the fact is that we would rather have more people involved and not charge for any of the booklets, etc., and encourage people to make donations, because the fact is that donations have been working out fine for the Compassionate Community Care, and it is a charity. So what is the My Story Matters? What is this all about? Well, first of all, the issue is the question of the individual. And we found, and I mentioned it to you before about the amount of loneliness. Well, the fact is that when someone talks about themselves and their story, it really helps them find meaning and purpose. So somebody who might be going through a lot of difficulty in their life, one of the things that really helps them find meaning and purpose in their life is reminding them of what they have done. Talking to them about what they have done, they then feel better about themselves. So what we're dealing with is the My Story deals with issues around depression, loneliness, and it helps with self-awareness and self-discovery, self-esteem, social isolation, and trauma. What we're doing is we're asking them, to talk about themselves. The fact of it is that they're telling their story in the case of this purpose in order to be reminded of their past, to be affirmed. We're about affirming people, to be involved with being reminded that, they did important things in their life. They had some fun in their life. They had a marriage, or they had relationships, they had etc. And this is what the My Story booklet is all about, to identify. If you're part of a community, we've encouraged communities such as, for instance, Catholic Women's League and groups like that. We've encouraged them to use the My Story element, to be visiting people who are much older now, to then establish not only the importance of that person in their community, but it also helps them establish their own history. So as a prime example, a Catholic women's group would be visiting the older members, and a lot of these people are now shut-ins, etc. And they were their leaders 20 years ago, and now they're spending time with them and talking to them. Well, what are they doing? They're really helping this person with their self-esteem, their loneliness, their depression that they might have, etc. We're not assuming anything, but we're also then establishing our own history. So it all goes together. It's a how would you say, a fulfilling situation. Recalling events and feelings are a key topic. Sharing memories. This is very, very important for somebody because it's a form of healing. We all have pain in our life. So when you're talking to someone about their past and you're asking them questions about their past and you're asking them to share. Now, let me give you an example. My wife wrote the book on Dr. De Weber. So she interviewed Dr. Barry De Weber, who was a great Canadian physician who was founded many things, including the De Weber Institute on Ethics. He was a co-founder of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. He was one of the early founders of pro-life in Canada, and it goes on and on. He did amazing research. He's I could start going through his book on you, but when we started interviewing him, of course, he was quite older at that point, and he had a lot of memory issues, but he had no problem remembering his past. That wasn't his difficulty. His difficulty was remembering that he had to, go to the grocery store and pick up groceries, or that he had someone visiting him later today, or that the day before he went out and did such and such. Yeah, that was hard to remember. But anything from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, he had his stories down and he shared them willingly, and he knew it very well. But it also, as I say, when we're talking about this, it improves cognitive function for a person. They're talking about their past. They're affirming themselves. They are recognizing the importance of what they've done in their life. They have an important place in this world, and we're asking them to share this. Why am I doing this? It's a very, on a practical level, why am I doing this? Because I'm affirming the other person. I'm helping them go through this difficult time in their life. I'm giving them a reason to want to live. You may say, what are you talking about? Well, the fact of it is as I've already showed you in the video opening up the presentation, the research, there's a lot of people who don't talk to anybody anymore, and they're having a hard time wondering why they're still alive. We review one's life, we write down their story, and it has many, many benefits. As I say, it improves their cognitive function. It helps them feel better about their own lives. It's very important to do so. Seniors at a much higher risk for suicide. It's a very sad reality. When we've legalized euthanasia, we've actually now created an outlet for suicide. And now that, let's give you the next sad reality. In Canada, now we're implementing this euthanasia for people with mental illness. And the problem with that, right off the bat, well, first of all, euthanasia is a problem. But secondly, people who are going through suicidal ideation, which is often related to their deep depression and their psychological issues, now we've given them an out by saying you can have lethal injection, MAID, euthanasia. You can have that. So what you've done is you've created a suicide out for them. And this is a very difficult thing. Men aged 85 to 89 have the highest rate of suicide over any other group. And the legalization of euthanasia has really shown us this problem of suicidal ideation and the growth of euthanasia because of this. By visiting people and asking their story, we help them find a purpose to live. We help them find a purpose to live. Participation in the My Story significantly also lowers depression. Why? Someone is concerned about them because they're visiting them. That lowers depression, but also we're visiting them because we care about them, and we're asking them about them. We're not talking about ourselves. We're asking them about them. Tell me about you. And we have a whole, as I say in the booklet, there's a whole guide to that in the booklet as to questions you can ask. And of course, these are just guides. They're not, it's not to be the endless list. And some of the questions in there don't apply to certain people, and others do, obviously, right? Ability to care for others. It's very important that we care for others. We're a culture that needs to care for people, but also as a human being, we're interconnected, okay? We're interconnected. So that's a very important ability to care for others. But I think it's important that we interconnect in a way that one generation is interconnecting with the next generation. So I'm in my 50s. So for me to be visiting somebody or to be getting the story from somebody who's in their 80s, it tells me a history. One of the problems with our human nature is we forget our past. and it causes, I would say, a problem in our culture because we're not learning from our past. So we interconnect with our past, we guide our next generation. This is helped by visiting with people, asking them, about their story. We're assured that one's life has meaning to others. So it's very important that we're helping someone find meaning in their life. And my story helps them to connect to the past. I think this is important, as I say, I mentioned for two reasons. One is because we're specifically interested in that other person and my story. The other thing my story does, and I'm going to throw this in right now, it gives you a reason to visit somebody. So somebody might be thinking, why is so-and-so, like, it's nice that, Kathy's calling me, but why does she want to visit me? This person might be thinking, or how are we going to set this up? That seems weird. I'm not interested in someone visiting me. But when you say, oh, we're interested in finding out, about your involvement, how you were involved in the past, the things you did, we're interested in you and your story, your history. It opens the door to visiting and the visiting experience. My story helps them and us to connect to the past. Loneliness is a psychological state. And this is a difficulty. People become lonely for many different reasons, but becoming lonely is a real risk for early death. I already mentioned the suicide rate, also health issues. You saw in the video that I showed you, they talked about the heart rate, the heart attack rate, etc. People who become sick because of their loneliness. They said loneliness is equal to smoking in relation to health. We're smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's actually equal to someone who has got an obesity problem. So when they compared, it's crazy, but it's true. When they compared data on people and their health problems related to obesity and health problems related to loneliness, they found it had very similar effects. Different, but very similar. And so right off the bat, you recognize loneliness is a serious health problem. And so when we get to this, the My Story does another thing. You're interested in someone's past, you're asking them to talk about themselves. It eases their transitions as they're aging into the next state of life, meaning, our lives change as we go on, and the ability to do things. And now we're in our home and we're alone. Our spouse has passed on, sadly. Our kids don't live with us. Sometimes kids don't even live in our community anymore, and we barely ever see them. You might get a phone call or a text from them. When I say phone call, you can tell I'm 54 years old because I talk about a phone call. If I were 34, I'd only be talking about texting. That's all I'd be talking about because they can't do anything else. It's just the way it is. A conversation combats loneliness. It's very important, and we're introducing conversation. We're using the My Story manual to create the history, but also to help create the reason for combating loneliness and the conversation. I'm going to say something else which is very important. My Story promotes and reinforces a person's place in society. When you get older, it's very easy to start feeling like there's no purpose anymore. What have I done? You might have noticed that if you've gone to funerals of someone who's, let's say, 90 something, there's almost no one at the funeral because those who they were interconnected with in their lifetime, many of them have passed on already. And so if you go to a funeral of someone who's, let's say, they died young, sadly, they might be in their 40s or 50s, etc. There's lots of people there because the people they interact with are still alive. So sometimes it's hard to see yourself as a place in the community. One of the reasons I personally, and I say this, I'm not indicting anybody or anything or challenging anybody, but the truth is I don't like nursing homes. I don't think we should have a lot of nursing homes. I understand the need for a nursing home in certain health conditions where it's become very difficult, if not almost impossible, to care for somebody in their home. But other than that, I really believe that people should be cared for in their home, that we should have home care, and that we should really encourage people remaining in a community. Why? This whole thing of the place of somebody in society. You have a place in society if you are in your home, if you're in the neighborhood you were in before, if people know you, if you have relationships with some people around you, that puts you in a place in society. It's very important to identify who you are and why you are here, okay? It encourages and acknowledges our importance. And reminiscing is very important. Reminiscing is a type of therapy. Now, we're not therapists. We're not trying to be therapists. Nothing of what we're doing is trying to be therapy. But At the same time, we recognize the importance of reminiscing, right? The importance of talking about the past, because it interconnects us with other people that we've had important in our life, interconnects us with our communities. Let me tell you a little story. My daughter Genevieve, she's now 22. Some of you might have remembered Genevieve because for the odd person who's on the call, Genevieve did work with Compassion Community Care for a while. When Genevieve was young, when we first moved to the mighty metropolis of Glencoe, and obviously I'm teasing you when I say the mighty metropolis of Glencoe. Anyway, it's a town I live in. The woman who lived across the street from us was in her 90s, and she was a retired school teacher. She did have family in the area, so it's not like this woman was very lonely or anything. But I remember Genevieve saying, and she must have been, oh, I don't know, she would have been like, say, 5 or 6 at the time, can I go visit Mrs. So-and-so across the street? And she'd say that. And Susan would always say, my wife would always say, well, ask her first if it's okay. Don't just go over there and assume you can go visit. And, you know, Genevieve was a cute little girl. So she was always happy to do that. And it was not a problem. And the lady across the street, she started saying all the time, we're going to admit Mary Lam, she started saying, oh, it's wonderful, Genevieve's coming over. And then you see Genevieve's younger brother, Thomas, he's 3 years younger. So he would have been 3 or maybe 4 at the time. He started saying, can I go over there too? We're like, well, no, we don't think that's a good idea. I remember going over there one time saying, you know, Thomas wants to come visit too. Is that okay with you? Oh, she'd say, oh yeah, that's great. It's wonderful. And you're saying, where's Alex going with this? Well, you know, what happened is that we would find out, oh, well, we'd say, well, what are you doing over at Mrs. So-and-so's house? Oh, we play hide and seek with her. And I'm thinking, oh, so they're going in. And sure enough, that's what they were doing. They were playing hide and seek with her. And they weren't doing this, my story, obviously, but they were visiting with her. And this is like a couple times a week. And then the lady across the street, she was in her 90s, she died. And so we went to the funeral home. We brought our kids with us, obviously, because they knew her well. And we're going through the line like everyone else does in a funeral home. And all the family is saying, oh, you're Genevieve and you're Thomas. Our mother talked about you all the time. My mother talked about you all the time. So what I'm saying is all of these things are interconnected and important. And we want to be that. Your mother talked about you all the time, the importance of you in the community. And now I can't move my slide for some reason. And I don't know why it doesn't. Oh, there it went. But my story, getting back to my story, sorry about that. I interrupted for a while and got on my own wavelength. It helps a person reconcile with the past. We all have issues from our past. There's nobody who doesn't have issues with their past. I'm sorry to say that. It fulfills a psychological need. We all need to deal. We all need to talk about our past, some more than others. Some people didn't have a good past. My mother, for instance, did some of this my story work in Woodstock, where I grew up, and she started contacting people. And the one lady in particular had a terrible past. My mother had no idea that this woman had such a terrible past, but she talked to her and everything, and they ended up having long conversations about this. And my mother was not trying to counsel her; she was just talking to her, and it ended up being very healing for this woman. Because your story is important. You are important. That's what we're actually trying to instill in someone. You are important. This is about the person. It's not about me. It's about the person we're visiting. And the purpose for the My Story, obviously speaking, the purpose for the My Story is to give us an in, but it's also to help that person talk about their past. We all have social relationships, right? We all have social engagements. We all have, interaction. We prevent isolation by meeting with people. It validates them. We validate them by visiting with them. And special individuals have a lifetime of experiences. The interesting thing is, you speak to someone, you might have no idea what their past was, and then they start talking about, oh, I did this, and I was a school teacher, and this was my experience. They might have started from there wouldn't be many anymore that started with a one-room schoolhouse. But of course, the lady across the street from us, when she started teaching, got to understand, she was in her 90s. She did start from a one-room schoolhouse, started teaching. So that's a totally different experience, But anyway, because we had spoken to her a few times too. She was across the street from us. So, go and drop in. Anyway, social individuals, we have a lifetime of experiences, and it's important that we share that. And that's what makes a difference. It overcomes this whole thing. Reminiscence therapy helps them deal with their past psychological traumas. And as I say, we're not trying to be therapists, but nonetheless, we are talking to them. We are only talking about what they want to talk about also. You might ask a question, they're not interested. This doesn't apply to them. Or they might say they don't want to talk about it. But as you develop a relationship, they might say, I do want to share something personal with you, and it sort of sits on my shoulders. Remember, that's privacy, right? That's they're sharing privacy. What you're doing is you're helping that person just by letting them talk. You're listening. Sometimes the best thing to do is to listen and not to say a thing. You might ask the odd question, but that's to say, not to say a thing. Let them speak. Anyway, it helps them deal with their own issues in life. It creates a sense of peace and relief. It's a healing component for the individual to talk about their past. Some people are living, let's say they've been living alone for quite a few years now. They've got a lot of issues that they've been dealing with also in their loneliness. Basic questions. So the My Story booklet deals with a lot of basic questions, and it deals with some basic questions, obviously, that are not needed for some people. It's a basic book, but what are we talking about? These basic questions. So, when were you born? These are issues. They talk about it. Issues about names of your parents. Who were your parents? Where did your parents come from? For instance, my dad was born in Germany. My mom was born in the Netherlands. Now they met here. Very interesting. Very interesting. Do you have any siblings? I grew up with 4 brothers, no sisters. My poor mom. Anyway, what are their names? What is the age difference? These kind of issues. These kind of issues have them talk about their past. It's very important. Did you ever attend family reunions? These kind of things. Where were you raised? Where did you go to school? If you're a member of a church community, what church community? What was it like? How was your experiences? Were they, they might have been very positive. A lot of people have very positive experience. Sadly, some people have had very negative experiences. What is the name of your best friend? Ask them about their best friend. They would remember, oh yes, my friend John. Yes, yeah. We ended up, we lived across from each other, and we spent, many years together. And this is what we did. We climbed, so and so ended up being the best, the maid of honor in my wedding because we spent so many years together. If married, when did you marry? How did you meet that person? These are the important things. Make someone start thinking about it. And sadly, I have to be brutally honest, we men tend to die first. So when you're visiting very elderly people, there are some men in that group. Very often it's women, just the way it is. We often die first, men. What was your first home like? Where did you spend time or your free time? Did you have any hobbies? These are all important things. Did you travel? A lot of people like to talk about the places they traveled, where they went, what they did. You see what I'm getting to? Your favorite places you visited, etc., etc. And we go on. And I think it's very important that people get the opportunity to talk about these things and reminiscent. Sometimes they might have a hard time remembering things, and then they'll sit there a while. It's okay just to sit there. It's okay just sit there, sip on your tea if you've got tea, I don't know, and talk, and then or maybe just listen. You're helping that person, and then suddenly they'll say, that's right. Yeah, that's it. That is what happened. And then they start talking about it a little bit, and then they move on, and it's all good. It's all fine. You're helping a person through a difficult time. And if I think about myself, let's say when I'm 84, God willing, if I make it that far, and I'm becoming very, on my own, etc. And someone's coming to say, hey, Alex, I want to drop in and say hi to you. How's it going? I think I would find a great joy in that, especially even if I were 94. I don't know if I'll last that long. I don't know. What is your favorite place you've visited? What are the social organizations, fraternal organizations, Catholic Women's League, for instance? What is your strong positive traits? What advice would you give a young person? These are important things. Interconnects us with the past. And I think that's very, very important, interconnecting with us from our past to our present, etc. So according to my clock, it's 8:24. So what I've been suggesting to groups, and I've been saying this a couple of times with the story booklet, etc. If you're joining us and you're part of a group, etc., or if you're wanting to set up sort of a compassionate community care sort of organization, but if you're connected, let's say, to a parish group or a church group, whatever community group, then I really emphasize that the way to really look at this situation is you could say, we need to do 2 things. We need to be visiting those who were our leaders before us, those who are in our communities who are now shut-ins, even if they weren't leaders before us in our community, etc. People who are alone and lonely, isolated. We need to be doing this because we're then creating this great service to them, but also to our community. We're preventing this whole euthanasia, assisted suicide push. It's very interesting. I get these phone calls I know I mentioned to you about the woman who called me, and she actually lived in Mississauga. That's where she lived. And I talk about I get these different calls. And what's the primary element of why these people are talking about death? And I get calls like that, people talking about dying. They want to die. And they're asking me different things about this. And so you're trying to hold the conversation and find a way to affirm them, find a way to connect them. So someone who has faith, well, that's a good way to do it, because right off the bat, it moves them from a situation where they're thinking, I feel I've got no purpose to live. I'm going through these difficult times. I'm experiencing whatever level of suffering. And yes, we are as humans, we do suffer. So that it is a reality. But you know, if you connect them to faith, and suddenly they start moving into a different direction, they start thinking of it differently. But let's say they don't have any interest in talking about that. So what do I do next? I start talking to them about their family. Do you have family? Do you have friends? What community organizations are you connected to? What are you connected to? What am I doing? I'm emphasizing the interconnectedness of the human person. I'm recognizing that the way for a lot of people to find purpose in living is by recognizing that they are interconnected with the other, right? That they have meaning in their connection to the community and with the other. And I'm working on trying to do that with them. And so you're talking, and it's not like I'm trying to be a therapist or I'm trying to be some expert or anything like that. I'm trying to listen. And I'm trying to just sort of ask some questions, affirm them, and then move them to the point where they're saying, yes, you know, I really could try that. That would be a good idea. I had a call from a woman who was really, she had, I guess she had, I'm trying to remember exactly what the condition was, but she needed an oxygen tank with her because she needed oxygen assistance. So she was living in her home and she had this oxygen tank and she needed oxygen assistance. And this was during the COVID crisis. She called, she wanted to die. She just wanted to die. She was just all upset. She said, I have friends, but people don't visit me right now. They're afraid of visiting me because that was during the COVID crisis. And I mean, there's still a bit of a COVID crisis because people have COVID. And of course, they're afraid to spread COVID. And we should be afraid to spread COVID. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying this woman's very isolated. And then she said, I can't go to the grocery store because, you know, how am I supposed to go there with my oxygen tank and things like that? And people aren't visiting and helping me. And she was very down. Like, I mean, she was emotionally distraught. And so what did I start talking to her about? Well, do you have other friends? Like what other friend? Maybe, you know, maybe that other friend of yours could also use a phone call as much as you can use a phone call. You know, maybe that other person who you know would be happy to talk to you because obviously you're dealing with it. And I said, you know, is there any services in your community that can help bring you food and things, who can help bring things to you because you're saying you can't go out? And then I said, were you ever part of a faith community? And then she admitted, yeah, and then she started talking about she was a strong believer, but she didn't attend a community, a faith community. Now during COVID, a lot of the churches were closed down anyway, to be brutally honest. You know, I don't know how good that was because a lot of people, that's their interconnectedness. They needed that. And now it's gone right now. So anyway, but their churches are back open now. So that's good. And I said, well, why don't you contact that church community? Contact them. Why don't you speak to them? Why don't you, because possibly they will then come visit you and they can help bring things to you. I don't know, like not sadly, not every community or church community, etc., is as open to doing that as maybe they should be. And I think this is so important in our culture. You've heard me say before, I'm actually an optimist, and it sounds like I'm a pessimist, but I'm very much an optimist. We live in a culture of abandonment and loneliness. And I don't have to say that without shocking you too much. The data speaks for itself, but on top of it, you look around you and you go to places, a lot of people, they're in their life and they don't have a lot of interaction with others. There's a lot of loneliness. So we need each other. Are there any questions? And as I say, it could be done through, we can look, maybe Kathy, you should look at the chat.
Yes.
And if someone wants to, has a real good question, there's a thing here, you can put your hand up. If not, you can actually unmute yourself. But Kathy, you go to the chat and then
Sure.
we can see what we can deal with.
Yeah. So we have one question. What do you do if someone shows signs of neglect? Who do you speak with?
Okay, greetings from Maine. That's good. Okay. Okay, signs of neglect is very important because I mentioned how that's the sign right off the bat that there's possible abuse going on, or certainly neglect. How do you deal with that? If you're part of a community, and let's say you're visiting them with the church, it would be important to mention that to the person who has some, how would you say, if, as I say, let's say it's the parish pastoral minister who is in charge of visiting, and you're doing this visiting, so you're actually working with the church community, then in that case, you should probably speak to them. If you have a concern and it seems like there's no one else to talk to, sometimes the best thing to do is to, let's say they're in a nursing home, like if they're in their home alone, you should be concerned about neglect and abuse, because there's a lot of people actually who experience elder abuse, meaning they have a son or a daughter who comes visit them once a week and they take things from them. And this person who may have had a very successful lifestyle, made great money in their life, now they're in their elderly years and they actually have nothing. So why are they showing signs of neglect? Because they actually have nothing. Why do they have nothing? Because they've been experiencing abuse. Okay, so I mean, if they're in a nursing home, you'd speak to someone there. If you've got big questions, usually you should talk to someone. And but if there's a specific church community, etc., that's important. The next question was about my story with the CWL members in the London Diocese. So they've been working on this, and I think it's very important. We've been trying to encourage there to be more My Stories received, because we want to put together a My Story booklet for the Catholic Women's League in the Diocese of London. And right now I don't believe we have enough stories, but we could do a mini booklet, I think. But you can see where we're going with this. It creates a story. Christina has her hand up, so we should let her ask a question, Kathy.
Yes.
Thank you. I have a question, but I also want to talk a little bit about the My Story idea. My mother passed about a decade ago, but in the years just prior to her passing from cancer, my brother came over from England and sat with her and really convinced her to try and write down her story. And she did start doing it. And we got about halfway through her life before she passed away. So my brother and I sort of finished it off. We actually got it published. And there's a sort of a small company called Lulu where you can actually submit your own, and it's quite wonderful. We had it ready for her, what would have been her 100th birthday if she'd still been alive. And now her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren can all have access to that story. And even I learned some things reading it through that I didn't know about her from her years going through World War I and all that sort of thing. So that's just to sort of reinforce the value of the whole My Story piece. My question was the pet therapy. I was interested to see that pop up in the materials that you had, the booklet. And are there organizations that you can link with that sort of help to provide an animal if you felt that somebody would benefit from pet therapy? I know a lot of people are very attached, but when they go into institutional type of homes or long-term care, then obviously their pets don't go with them. They miss them or they die. And I think there's great value in reconnecting them with pets. But I don't know how to go about doing it.
Christina, I agree with that comment completely. And some communities would have people who go visit or go into nursing homes with a pet. You know, for instance, I know that the nursing home that my mother-in-law was living in before she passed away, that they regularly had people show up with pets. Now, I have a beautiful dog at home, and I don't think, and she's actually the type of dog that she's a golden doodle, so she doesn't shed, but she's so precious, it's ridiculous. So, you know, she's actually the type of dog who someone would love to see, because, and she doesn't beg too much either, which is nice about her. But I mean, that is the reality. There is some services like that, but obviously every community is different, Christina. So, and it's also based on what is the person interested in. Some people would love, if you had a dog, some people might say, oh, well, bring your dog with you. You might show them a picture of your dog, and it's like having children. They'd say, bring your dog with you. I always say to Kathy, bring your baby with you. I like babies. So anyway, the point of it is that I'm not going to compare babies to dogs, but nonetheless, you know what I'm getting to. So it's something that does work in certain circumstances, so long as that they're inviting it, right? They're inviting it. And that service might exist in your community already. Greetings from Maine here. And so Joanna is saying how she, as an RN, she found that older people in social situations often want to tell me in detail all the experiences of their chronic conditions. Their day-to-day is enveloped by these diseases that they have. You know, actually, it's very true. Sometimes that's what they want to talk about. I guess then that's what they're talking about. And if you're visiting them, I guess that's what you're listening to. And sometimes you're going to as Kathy knows, sometimes we're going to say nothing because that's what they want to talk about, and we listen. I'm not saying that's all they should. We can steer them directions. You can say, well, what about your childhood? Tell me about your childhood. But anyway, go on, Kathy. You might want to comment.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, sometimes we will, like you said, Alex, sometimes they're pretty quiet. But what was the exact question that she mentioned? Sorry.
Oh, because some people, she's mentioning how some people only want to talk about all their health issues. That's just what they want to talk
Yes,
about
yes.
because they have several chronic conditions.
That's right. Yes, I would agree. Sometimes it seems to be the only thing, but I think that's a very, like you're saying it, like you mentioned it, really superficial because they don't want to go deeper. And then once you bring up something like you notice on their wall, they've got a picture of, a religious person or some symbol or something that's going on in their life, you can draw that out of them and move them move their attention, because that's probably where either it's like a barrier that they're creating on purpose because they don't want to go deeper, because they don't want to talk about underlying issues, real issues like existential issues or suffering that they might be going through, or feelings of low self-worth because they're so socially isolated. But that's okay, we can keep it to where they're comfortable with, but we can bring out more things. Like Alex said, he's an optimist, right? So focus on the positive things that are happening in their life, focus on the present right now, what they can connect with, and how you can connect them to people that care about them, that still may be wanting to connect with them.
And as was said in the booklet, ask questions.
Yes.
So
always.
when so they might want to talk, and I guess that's some people, as was such, that they're very focused on their chronic conditions. They might have a
Yes.
dozen of them. I don't know. Maybe they have more chronic conditions than they actually. Maybe they think they have more than they actually have. But nonetheless, let's not judge anybody. We just maybe asking questions and directs them in a different way. There's a question here about vaccine passports. So obviously speaking, there is a reality that at this time in history, you can't visit certain people. And that's sort of disappearing now. But we have to be careful with that because in some places you just can't visit somebody because if you don't have your vaccines done. I'm not going to comment on the right or wrongness. I'm just going to say it's just a reality, right? And that's going to change. And our depression isolation is prevalent in other cultures, countries like Egypt, where interaction in community is so different. Well, Kathy, for instance, has a Portuguese husband, and she's Polish, and so that would give her a different perspective. She might want to comment on that.
Sure. So, for example, I notice in certain communities, they're more religious. So in their culture, they may interact with people on a different level when it comes to depression and isolation. So for example, like in Egypt, where interaction is so different, there is that, I find, divide sometimes so culturally too between men and women. So just responding to that, I don't have much experience personally with Egypt, but I do see that there tends to be more of a divide or segregation between the two different groups, men and women necessarily, especially, and there is a number, like an actual like the quantity of men versus women can differ in certain communities too. So men definitely want to relay better with, oftentimes we see in certain cultures like that, like in Egypt, I've heard that oftentimes men will assimilate with other men more so, and it's more interaction, it's more appreciated if men are responding to other men. And then here, definitely, there isn't that divide. So again, in turn, in those cultures, women will gather and they'll take care of each other, versus having that genders mixing perhaps, but that can change, and that changes all the time culturally. So if they're here and they're immigrated, for example, there may not be a divide, but interacting with the opposite, for example, gender, is more different. It's acceptable and it's more common here. So that could be something where you may want to relay that person. If it's a man, you may want to have them interact with another man, and that's something to keep in mind too. Also, there's certain culture barriers. For example, how people want to speak about end of life. So that's something to take into consideration too with isolation and depression. I always try to ask people, like Alex mentioned, what is their cultural background or preference, or what is their religious affiliation, if any? Do they go to a church? Are they assimilated? Are they associated with any kind of faith group? Because that's a call we received too recently about a woman, especially in Barrie too, who is really not connected to a community, a faith community, and connecting her to someone who cares is really important in that instance. So usually getting them in their community is really key, finding someone in their language.
there are a lot of people today that have what you'd call a past connection to a community, but they're not currently connected to a community. And whether that be that they have changed their view of life or whatever that be, or they have gone out of practice in that, it makes things very interesting today as compared to the past. So that you'll notice in the booklet that we're always saying things like, respect their wishes. If they do not want to discuss a topic, we do not discuss the topic. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to discuss a topic in the future. That means at this moment they don't want to talk about something, you don't talk about it. And that's that simple. I always say to also people, let's say someone is becoming quite elderly and they're having more difficulty communicating, etc. Sometimes listening is the way where you're there and you spend a fair amount of time in silence with them, etc. Sometimes that's what they need. They need that human presence, and that's important to them. I'm not saying that there won't be abilities to communicate. It's the same thing when you heard me react to the whole thing about religion. To me, it's very important, and to some people, we have to be very careful with it, and that's just a reality. As for communities, Kathy hit the nail on the head. Some communities, as I say, women only visit women and men only visit with men, and you don't interact that way. And I'm not saying that's a great thing or not. I'm just saying that's the way it is, and that's how things work. And so we have to remember that. Is there anybody else who wanted to unmute themselves and ask a question? Kathy, you want to say something? Sorry.
Sure. We have a direct question. You had mentioned that the My Story significantly affects depression reduction. How have you seen that tangibly in your experience running this program? I ask if people ask questions about the program.
Well, there's several people who've been quite involved in it. So as I say, people like, for instance, my mother started getting very involved in Woodstock, contacting people and speaking to people. And she also, we had a training session in Woodstock, and we did quite a few people in the training. There was about 30 that day in the training. And so they started visiting people, etc. And I mentioned to you that there was the one woman who she knew very well, who's quite older, quite a much older lady, and she knew that this is a woman who spent a lot of time alone, etc. So she called her up, and they knew each other. So it wasn't like, oh, I've never met you before, so why do you want to talk to me type thing. It was more of a, yes, so and so, yes, happy to talk to you. And then, of course, as I say, she found out that this lady had a very difficult younger years. She'd gone through a very difficult marriage, and I'm not sharing any names or anything, as you can tell. She'd gone through a lot of difficult situations, and so as I was saying, when that conversation continued, my mom felt that it was somewhat of a healing factor for this woman, but it also really opened up the eyes for my mother to hear these things and to realize, as much as we all go through our difficulties in life, some people have gone through some very big difficulties, and you start understanding maybe how someone is because of what they've experienced. Yeah.
And if I may add one more thing here, Alex, they also mentioned here above the Marianne, she mentions, I just received a story from a 60-year-old CWO member who saw in our newsletter that I was asking members to do their stories. I didn't realize this lady was a regional chairperson in their 80s, and went on the London Nicene executive for 8 years. I'm typing her story and will visit her to show her what I've done. And if she would like to add more to it, now we're able to visit again as COVID slowed down. So this is a member here who wanted this, and there are many people that are responding to this initiative, My Story account, and they want to participate. And I'm actually going to quote something that we received recently, that a person had the opportunity to interview 2 members. So even though the person who was being interviewed was older, they said that this was an absolute privilege for them. It was so heartwarming to hear their stories. One lady is 103 years old, years young, and the other at 92. The stories were so inspiring, as both ladies have lived life well. It was such an honor to be invited into their homes, especially as we were still dealing with COVID restrictions. I consider myself to be truly blessed to have had this experience. And another point I want to mention here is our recent newsletter from March featured a story from a My Story account, and it includes golden life nuggets and one person's account. And she was so happy to hear that we published her story as our front page newsletter item. And she said, I'm so excited about this, and I'm so happy, and I want to share this with my grandkids. So it does make a difference. It definitely makes a difference for the people being interviewed, and even for those who are interviewing. And so it's kind of twofold, and it's really great. Thanks.
So My Story is both a positive experience, but it's also a tool for communicating, which is very important. Now, this is not a new idea, as many people know. If you go, let's say, to a nursing home, like the one my mother-in-law used to live in before she passed away, you would have noticed that every door, or just beside the door, they had a little story, but it was very short. It was like an 8.5 by 11, and said so and so, was married to her husband in this year, and da 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 da. She lived in this city, and they lived on a farm for so many years, and they had this many kids, and da da da. And it was very basic. We recognize, and they recognize, that what you're doing is you're establishing that the person you might be seeing in that room, who it does not in any way appear to be the same as the person when they were, let's say, 45 or 50. Well, this is the same person, and they are an important person, and they've lived a good life. This is a comment from Allison. Just a funny comment to share. My husband and I would just sit and talk with his grandparents when we would visit them. We barely did things. It was more just presence. Other family members, their children would do much for them materially and for their health. But I remember how much it meant to them, and how they remembered us just because we just sat with them in conversation. It speaks to your beautiful program of being with the person, and why that matters to them so much more. Of course, their material needs are important, but shows it shouldn't be at the expense of others present to them, which is an important point. We like to say, oh, we did this and this. I got so and so. Not to say these things aren't important. Well, we bought these new clothes, we did this or whatever, and all that's important. Don't get me wrong. Nonetheless, being with that person sometimes is even more important. Now that I have grandkids, personally, I love my grandkids coming around, and so it's a different sort of relationship, and I really love that. And I can imagine in 30 years when I have great grandkids, if I live that long, God willing, how that would be. You had noted that suicide is much higher among seniors. Would you be able to provide some research in this regard? If you email me or email Kathy, we'd be happy to send you some data. It's sadly just the reality. I wish it weren't the reality, but the suicide rates certainly we got the data basically from the suicide data that you can pull up from anywhere, whether it be Stats Canada, etc. And the data showed that typically the highest suicide rate is men 85 to 89. So we like to think of teenage suicide as being the highest rate, and teenage suicide has certainly gone up, and that's a tragedy. Also, in my opinion, all suicide is a tragedy. Nonetheless, I don't think it's less tragic for an 87-year-old to die by suicide than a 17-year-old, even though we might view it that way culturally. I don't view it that way. I view it as always a tragedy. So anyway, but I'm happy to send you data. It's not a problem, and it's actually, Mr. and Mrs. Google can find it for you too, but it's easy to find this data, yeah. And Louisa has her hands up. She's actually got two hands up, so she's pretty intent.
I'm sorry. It's new for me.
That's fine, no problem.
I would like to ask a question regarding to the people who would like to commit suicide. What would you do?
Well, I've actually dealt with these calls, and they're not easy, because obviously somebody is usually pretty emotionally distraught at that time. And I in no way attempt to be some medical professional or psychological professional when these calls come in. If they're really difficult, I will try and refer them to, a suicide line. But when they call, like immediately, what am I trying to do? And it's the same thing as before. I'm trying to connect them to another sort of reality by just asking questions, asking about family, asking about other things in life, and asking, do they have children and things like that? And why am I doing that? Because I know that when you start establishing that they actually have a life beyond what they're currently feeling, because they're usually very dark at this point. When you're talking to someone like this, you have to imagine the reality that they're so darkened by their reality that they're having a hard time seeing beyond that. Whether it's a physical illness or whether it's psychological, whatever it is, or a combination of these things. And we like to think of these things in the spiritual realm, and we recognize in the spiritual realm how terrible suicide is. But the person at that point isn't sadly thinking in a spiritual realm, are they? So we're trying to connect them, and that's all you can do. And then, as I say, if someone is not in any way like moving at all, oh, what am I doing? Then I'm going to try and move them into a suicide prevention line, because I'm not the expert, but I do know that interconnecting them with their relationships with others does often bring them through that. And that's all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create purpose and meaning in their life, that they can start seeing that when I know they're very dark. Right? They're very dark at that time. Yeah. When you're visiting someone who is suicidal, that's very difficult. Like if you actually, I'm not saying you will ever meet someone like that and you're meeting with them and they're talking about death. I'm not saying that's ever going to happen. But if it did happen, yes, you should always talk to somebody who is an expert on that. But at that immediate moment, I would immediately say that you don't try and be an expert. You're not in any way trying to be in anything like that. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to immediately start asking them questions. You're not trying to judge anybody either, but you're trying to connect them to their family, having them start thinking about the others in their life. Why are you doing that? You're grounding them in a reality that they have a life and that they have a life worth living. We can't create miracles for them either. Like sadly, as you see with situations, we can make a difference in people's lives, but we can't always be the difference in someone's life. You hope you can be, but we just do what we do and we pray for the rest. And I do say it that way on purpose. There's another participant with their hand up. I guess Christina has her hand. Christina has her hand up.
Thank you.
If we want to start a compassionate care in our community, in our church,
yeah,
how would we go about approaching our priest?
So Kathy, you can respond to that.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. That's a great question. So we've had other groups that taken on this initiative, and they've actually brought it on with just a normal, meeting with their priest, and they love the idea. So most priests are very receptive. They're very open, and they see that this is a huge need. It's a big gap too in their parish life and community, and they would love for someone to spearhead an initiative like this. So if you feel that way, that you can do that, by all means, reach out to your priest if you would love to connect with some ideas on how to do so, or have a combination meeting with myself or anyone else. That we have other people who have also done this initiative and how that talk has gone. We can allow you to connect with them too, and you can kind of meet together in mind. But by all means, but yes.
We have the booklets available.
Yes.
We provide training. There's no problem with training. If it's set up that, let's say it's on Saturday, so and such, and that's the training time, we'll provide training. And if let's say it's during the week, that's fine too, as we're doing right now. The other thing is that if you get involved with it enough, Christine, then you can do your own training, or you can continue working with Christina doing training. There's no problem with Kathy. I said Christina. That was someone else who used to do training with me, with Kathy. And we're totally open to any of those needs. Yes.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Louisa's got her hand up again. Either she likes putting up her hand, or is this just a new, or she's got another question.
No, I have another question, really. Do you have some care homes here in Surrey?
There's nothing happening in Surrey that we know, but that doesn't mean Louisa can't start something in Surrey.
Good idea.
Very good.
How can I start it?
The same question Christine had. If you're working in a faith community, that's one easy way to start. Not to say that it's limited to that. Of course, it's not. You'll notice something else about the booklets. There's nothing about the booklets that are specifically of any specific religious nature in any way, shape, or form. And that was done on purpose, because we do not see this as being per se something that has to be done for religious reasons, even though that's often how it interconnects. Someone's involved, as we know, as we just mentioned, Catholic Women's League are involved in this, etc. Obviously that's a natural connection, but others might do it because they're involved with their Rotary Club or something, or they are concerned about people in the nursing homes and they decide to start a group locally. And there's nothing about this booklet which would say, oh, that looks religious, because it doesn't actually. But it can be done in such a way that's either secular or religious. It doesn't make a difference. Yeah.
And where is your office?
Yes. We're located in London, Ontario. But again, we can ship books out. Yep. but we can
Wow.
ship books out to you, and we can also provide them virtually, like a PDF link, or you can take, copies shipped to you. And we can also, provide training like this remotely. And depending on the sessions, if you need someone that's more hands-on and based in your community, we can connect with you about that as well.
And if you can fill up a room with people who are
Yes.
a large group who want to be trained, Kathy's happy to go with her baby there and do
Yeah,
training.
absolutely.
And as she's doing her training, she's got a cute little boy right now who can be
Show you a
passed
picture.
around, and everyone will be saying, "Oh, well, we got to bring Kathy back just to have that baby."
Yeah, I'll show you a picture. He is cute, actually. So I don't mind. Yeah, he's 5 weeks. Okay.
Kathy, a personal question. Have you ever lived in Vancouver area?
No,
No?
I haven't.
Oh, okay.
You know,
Well,
I've not lived in Vancouver. I'm going to be in Vancouver on May 10th, 11th, and I'll be in Victoria May 12th. But that's a whole nother story, Louisa. But anyway, as I say, if there's interest, we can do it online training without a problem. And if there's a lot of interest, we can fly Kathy to Surrey, BC.
yes.
I live in a high
do
rise.
training.
Sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
live in a high rise, and most of us are elderly people. But I don't consider myself elder because I'm still young. I'm 69 years old.
You're very young, Louisa.
Very.
That's very young.
Yes.
all I'm saying is that maybe this is a little thing that you feel like is helpful for you to do, because there's people in your building.
Yes.
You don't need to create a ministry anywhere. Or there's people in your building. There's probably people on your floor who you bump into, and you notice, oh, and then you say, well, I just want to drop in and say hi to you. And what do you think? And you'll find that some people will be not interested, so you just, won't try that one again. And they think, and others will say, it wasn't it great that Louisa came over, and I'd like to see her again. Yeah. Happy to have tea again next Tuesday.
Yes.
But the problem is, how can we meet although there is coronavirus around?
Well, that is a problem. There's no question about it. There are restrictions and concerns. It seems that things are opening up more now, but nonetheless, there's no question this is a problem, and it's been a problem in actually promoting visiting, because for a long period of time you couldn't visit.
That's true.
And I feel very sorry for those people who were caught in a stage of loneliness and isolation because of disease. We understand the reality, but at the same time, a lot of people, it was very harsh on them. But anyway, I think our meeting.
You know what I do? I meet with people in the lobby, because there are some couches. I sit on a couch and she sits on another couch, and we talk.
That's amazing.
So it's 9 o'clock now in my time. It'd be 6 o'clock Louisa's time. And so we will see you tomorrow night, and we'll go through the rest of the training session. And if you have experiences you want to share, save them for the end, because we'll have time for that. Hopefully starting around 8:20 or so. I'll be 5:20 Louisa's time. And and then we can we can do sharing with that, because I think that's important for others who are seeing others' experiences. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
You did a great job.
Thank you so much. You too. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night, Kathy.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank you.
Alex.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.